What is going on, Hive Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and we're going to talk about being fat but fit as a myth, or healthy at every size is not a true statement. Is that the case? Because a new cross-sectional study was released this month. So we're gonna have to dive into that. I'm gonna go ahead and break it down in this video. Stay tuned. Of course, guys, I'm not going to bog you down with my jump rope, but if you do want a jump rope with an ergonomic design, swivel design, and aluminum handle, you can get all of that, plus the carrying case that comes with the jump rope for only $16.50. You can click on the top right-hand corner of this video or down in the description box below. And of course, as always, guys, thank you so much for your support. Let's go ahead and jump right into the video. Healthy at every size has been something that has been pushed. And although there are many studies out there, controlled studies, studies looking at over 2,000 different participants, follow-up studies of more than 15 years after the initial research, showing that there is a similar metabolic health or cardiovascular health within the participants of those who are active and not overweight versus those who are active and overweight. So if you're normal weight versus overweight, when you equate for the activity level, the metabolic health tends to be the same. This is not saying, hey, just be overweight, don't worry about it, and just be active versus inactive. But this is the research that we've seen. And also, for example, with my video essay that I did not too long ago about sumo wrestlers, I talk about this specific element, how sumo wrestlers are actually metabolically healthy because of their aggressive activity that they do in terms of training, in terms of competition, even though they're consistently eating aggressively in terms of calories on the opposite end to ensure that they become overweight and even obese. So what is this cross-sectional study coming out of Spain telling us now? Now keep in mind, it is a cross-sectional study, and with that come limitations. Many limitations come from cross-sectional study, but cross-sectional study gives you a non-detailed but bigger snapshot picture, as there were over 500,000 participants, both men and women, in this study. So if there is a similar trend across all of these people, there could be something there. So what is the study that I'm talking about? The study was published January 22nd of 2021 in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology by Pedro L. Valenzuela and colleagues. And what they found was, through this cross-sectional study, that if you were overweight and active, you still were more likely to contract cardiovascular diseases over someone who was normal weight and not active at all. Meaning that direct line, or the direct connection, is the person being overweight versus the person being normal weight. And this is very interesting because it turns the studies, the control studies that we've seen, kind of on its head. Don't get me wrong, there have been studies showing that being overweight alone has this connection to poor cardiovascular health, but there have been more control studies showing that metabolic health is the #1 factor, and that is determined by activity versus inactivity. But this study is breaking through that notion and showing that no, even activity does not reduce the risks, the higher risk of having having poor metabolic health. Now, so you understand what this breakdown is. It's not saying that if you're overweight and you're active is the same as being overweight and inactive. Because if you're overweight and inactive, it's much greater for cardiometabolic health issues. It's much less, but it's still not enough to overcome someone who is normal weight and inactive. So normal weight and inactive will give you a better metabolic health situation, or lower risks for metabolic health, versus someone who is overweight and active. And they even looked at obese and active, and it was much greater. It was much more riskier for those obese and active versus those who were overweight and inactive. So it's kind of like this regression formula almost, going up well, you see that the risk factors are increasing the more weight you're carrying. And just to try to see if the data correlated well, they even split both men and women and analyzed them individually. All the men in the group, all the men in the study versus all the women in the cross-sectional study. And they saw that the data, that the information was the same, that the linear movement up in terms of higher risks for cardiovascular diseases, things like diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, all of that increased. The only thing that was slightly lower was for overweight and active versus normal weight and inactive was hypertension. But in terms of diabetes and high cholesterol, that was still higher in those who were active, very active. They split into two in terms of active and somewhat active versus inactive. And those who were very active still had higher possibilities for diabetes and high cholesterol with a lower possibility of hypertension versus only the inactive normal weight person. Because once that person becomes somewhat active, they're already ahead in terms of metabolic health with the overweight group. And once they're very active, the differences are much wider. Keep in mind, this is a cross-sectional study, so there's limitations. For example, they just know that there's correlation there, but they cannot elicit the actual causation. They don't know if the person became active because there were problems already, because there were already metabolic health problems, and they are now active because of that, and they're trying to reduce that. So they're more susceptible for those things to be there lingering as they try their best to get healthier. So they don't know what came first, if that came first, if the health problems came first, or the activity came first. One thing that it could be the case, which tends to be a little bit rare, it could have been already unhealthy, they were already active, and then they gained weight while being active. It's very difficult for that to happen because usually when you are active, certain things happen. Your appetite actually goes down. You kind of go into a rhythm, a flow of healthy activities. So you also start to eat more so you also become more health conscious with how much calories you're taking in and how much you're eating. But they also didn't look at the diets of these participants. So the diets weren't controlled for. So the participants could be at a caloric surplus while also eating unhealthy foods, while those who are normal weight tend to be eating more healthier, nutritious foods. So those are the elements that you should pay attention to in terms of this cross-sectional study. But I do want to leave you on this last note. Please keep in mind that although metabolic health seems to be a thing, it seems to be a thing that's right in the center between someone being overweight and someone being normal weight. Many control studies show that metabolic health is an actual factor. Metabolic health is the main factor, that even if you were overweight, if your metabolic health is good, you still have the same chance to live as long as someone who is normal weight and metabolically healthy. And that tends to be dictated by your activity. Because when someone is active, even if they're overweight, the body fat that they store tends to be subcutaneous body fat and not the visceral body fat because of their activity. The visceral body fat gets pushed out, and all you get is really the fat that's under the skin, because the visceral body fat is the body fat that causes all of these different heart problems, because it's fat that's building up around your organs, around vital organs, and that can cause all of these different problems. Usually when someone is active, they are also metabolically healthy. So in terms of the cardiovascular health, you can live as long. Studies have shown that you can live as long as those who are metabolically healthy and normal weight. But when looking at all-cause mortality, those who are overweight and obese still die at the same rate as those who are overweight and obese and unhealthy or have health issues with cardiometabolic health. And I'll explain why. Because when you look at the situational, physical experience that they have, they tend to be in more dire situations because of their weight. For example, if they're in a car accident, it is much more difficult to transport somebody who is obese in time for them to be taken care of in the hospital for life-threatening injuries. If there is an injury, it becomes much more difficult for a doctor to find that bodily injury around your body if you're obese. It's even more difficult to perform surgery on someone who's obese. So when all of these factors come into play, they still end up actually dying at the same rate simply because of the weight factor. So it's not a get out of jail free card. Yes, you may have a chance to live a full life based on your metabolic health, but there are still other factors that you have to take into account that can cause you to die early if you do not reduce the weight. I don't think anyone should be fat shamed or told that they're unhealthy simply because they're overweight. But I do believe that because of the information that we have, because of the data that we have, that those who are overweight should acknowledge the limitations that are there and try their best to reduce weight just to give themselves the best chance at the longest life that they can possibly have. I hope this video was very informative for you. I will link the cross-sectional study down in the description box below. And of course, as always, guys, I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon. I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here.